3, 2.
And we're live. Good day, whiskey brothers and sisters, and welcome to the Whiskey Book Club's 10th book review and the 3rd edition of this book right here, Whiskey Island, a portrait of Isla and its whiskeys. It's a fantastic book. If you don't have it, you should buy it already, or get the older one as well, which you get if you can find it. The Peat, Smoke and Spirit. It's fantastic if you can find that book. I think everyone should have both. But let's continue. I don't know what to say. I'm kind of excited. My name's Dolph. I'm the founder of the Whiskey Book Club. I'm really happy to be here with you today. For those of you that are new to us, we are a bunch of whiskey geeks. All of these guys here in this one right here, we're all whiskey geeks. We love reading. We love reading about whiskey and whiskey-related activities. And this, friends, is, I'm going to say, the best whiskey book club out there. There's other whiskey book clubs. There are. But none of them delve as deeply as we do with the author than we. So 3-4 weeks, we're talking to them for 10, 12, 20 hours off and on the air. It's fantastic. You get to learn so much about our authors. And you do too by being here with us. Now, I said it last week. I said it again this morning, but I'm really excited. We're honored to have Andrew with us. He's so accomplished. He's so respected. He's an intriguing author. And beyond that, he's a journalist, consultant, lecturer, tasting judge, guide, author to 15 other books. And we are lucky to have him with us here today. So let's start our roundtable introductions with our names, our other platform handles, and what's in your glasses. And we're going to do this alphabetically. Let's start Dave, Kent, Nick, and then we're going to finish with author Andrew at the end. So,
hey guys and gals, it's Yukon Dave coming from his basement as always. I'm drinking something that's just not on Isla, but it's just a little bit west of there. It is peated. The liquor truck didn't show up this morning, so I didn't get what I wanted. And then I tried to buy a Kalila, and the store didn't have that, so I just went home and ate some cheesies. So
I gave up and ate cheesies.
Yeah. Well, that's all I got for you.
Okay, thanks, buddy. Kent, you're up. And Dave, you should know that Kent, Nick, and I have more than enough bottles to share. Probably 20 to 30 different expressions from Isla with you. But
And considering Dave was sitting around my fire pit last night, I could have easily sent him home with a bottle. My name's Kent. I go by Whiskey Ass on pretty much all platforms. And tonight I am going with a Buna 18. And this is actually the older version of it. So Dolph and me, if you follow us at all, we did a vertical tasting of the old 12 and 18 versus the new 12 and 18. So it was, go and watch us. It's kind of interesting.
it's good. Nick, you're up.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick, Black Hat Whiskey, and I'm doing a carbonated beverage for the afternoon, but I have pulled a bottle of Buna Tochida out to have beside
Nice.
for the afternoon talk.
Thank you. And tell us about that one. Sorry, Andrew. I just wanted you to tell me about that bottle because I haven't seen it I don't know if I have seen it. I actually put it up again.
Oh, twitch it up. Yeah.
Oh, no, I've seen it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was purple on the bottom and I didn't recognize it. All right. Thank you very much, Nick. And Andrew.
Great to be with you all. Speaking to you from the south of France, which is where I've lived for the last 11 or 12 years. Really looking forward to this evening. We're going to get on to 2 distilleries that I'm very fond of in many ways, different ways, and some other subjects very dear to my heart. I know Dolph's got questions lined up, ready to go on those. I've got a cup of tea with me, Yunnan tea, and I've also got a glass of, actually it's Lafroig. It's the one I've had on the other occasions as well, the Lafroig 4 Oak. I don't have a big collection here of whiskies in France. Have to do something about that at some stage, but for the time being, that's what I've got, so that's what I'm drinking, and very good it is too.
It's perfect. That's the scene. All right, and for me, this is really funny because we didn't talk about this. The 3rd bottle of Buna that we have, and Kent and I with the same one, the 18-year-old, and it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite whiskeys, so I had to bring it up. Andrew, let's start with you, if I may. So this is going to be a long question, so please stick with me. And it was stated by our panel in the very first week. Two of us said that this book could have also been a travel companion. So this week we've been blessed to learn about peat. We're going to hear a lot about peat this afternoon. I have lots of questions about it, but also about the weather, the flora, and the fauna. Why is it so important that you include this in your book originally? Was it your first thought to have them both and integrate them? Because it goes chapter by chapter, very well integrated.
Absolutely. That was always completely my intention. The idea was to give a portrait of the place. Now, obviously, the place is a whiskey place, so we wanted to cover all the whiskies as well as we could, all of the whiskies that existed at that time, of course. Now we have even more. But, you know, I think I mentioned in an earlier discussion we had that I'm kind of not a geek. I don't have that drill down kind of mind. I have the other sort of mind, the mind that heads out in every direction and never really stops until it reaches the furthest flung corners of the universe. So naturally, I wanted to bring everything in that I could about the island. That was why I wanted to write the book in a way. Yes, I wanted to write the book to understand the whiskies more intimately and to, in particular, to try and understand where their distinctive flavor profiles came from. Is it a question of what we could call terroir, or is it a question of raw materials, or is it a question of distilling practices, or is it a question of aging practices? These are things we've talked about in every edition of this series so far, and we'll carry on talking about. But equally, it was every bit as important to me to bring all the other aspects of the place in there, because once I'd been to Islay, whenever I thought about Islay, it was impossible to take a sip of Islay whiskey and not think about the weather that I'd experienced on Islay. Because it sears itself into your mind. It's so extraordinary. It's so extreme. It's so challenging. To me, it's the reason the whiskey exists in the first place. I remember years ago, I did a wonderful thing. I'm not sure it still exists, called the Classic Malts Cruise. And I was on a small boat. We went from Lagavulin all the way to Oban and all the way to Talisker and then back to Lagavulin again. Nice. Through a lot of pretty bad weather, cold weather. And I was on the boat with a couple of Norwegians and some Scots and other people. And one of the Norwegians said, you know, in Norway, we have such a thing as spinal chill. You know, when you're really so cold that you just cannot get any colder than that. And whiskey really is the only drink that can cope or do anything with spinal chill. If you have spinal chill, it's really time you reach for a glass of whiskey. I'm sure you Canadians know all about spinal chill as well. Mm-hmm. But, you know, that's sort of what I mean. You know, you go there, you experience the weather. It's extreme. It's extraordinary. It pushes you to the limit. And then you have the whiskey and they come together. They're made for each other. I could say the same thing to some extent in a different sense about the wildlife. And, of course, the peat, which is the other non-whiskey chapter we're looking at, has a more direct bearing on the whiskey as well. So yes, all of these things were very much my intention. And you know, I wrote this book in 2004, and ever since then I've wanted to do other books like this, and it's really one of the great griefs of my life that I haven't been able to for various reasons. Because I think I would love to do wine books like this, where you talk about the wine, but you also talk about the place, because those also go together. You could do beer books like that. You could tackle every single alcoholic subject like that, because there is something about alcoholic beverages. I don't know if it's the alcohol in the alcoholic beverage or the culture or the history of them, but they're very infused and saturated with the places in which they come into being. And this really, if I have one overriding concern or interest throughout my whole 30-year career, it would be that topic, that interrelationship between these very particular beverages and the place from which they come, and the meaning that those drinks acquire and those places acquire for us by being interfused and interrelated in that kind of way. So there you are. That's a long answer to a long question.
That's very good. But I'm adding to my question anyways, because we changed the title from Peat, Smoke and Spirit to this, Whiskey Island. And did you change the title because you wanted to focus a little bit less on the distilleries and a little bit more on the whole encompassing everything, the flora, the fauna, the weather?
Okay, well, I'm going to let you guys into a secret here, and everybody else who happens to be hanging into this, wherever you're watching, however you're doing it. It wasn't my idea to change the title. That was the publisher's idea.
Okay.
And they chucked that at me, and I thought for a little bit, and I thought, wait a minute, that's not such a bad idea. I quite like that idea, and I quite like the title. Because in a way, peat smoke and spirit, okay, the peat smoke was meant to sort of indicate the place a little bit, because if you go to the island, certainly back then, it may have changed now, but if you know, whenever I went to the island back then and you drove around in quest of all the wonderful wildlife and landscapes and the other things that leads you to drive around the island, you would always be smelling peat smoke on the wind, particularly in the winter, because people use peat for their fires, and it comes out of the chimney and it blows all over the place. So I always meant by peat smoke to refer, as it were, to the island. Peat smoke and spirit, bring the two together. But I think very often when the readers came to it, they assumed that I was just talking about whiskey, and many people thought it was, you know, exclusively a whiskey book. And I remember looking on Amazon and seeing some sort of some of the readers were sort of pissed off that there was so much other stuff to get through. You know, real whiskey geeks. Yeah, you know, the whiskey stuff's good, but I don't know what he's doing writing about all these other things. You know, what's the point? We want the whiskey. That was never the point. I always wanted to bring both together. And in a way, I think Whiskey Island brings both together better than the original title does. So I was very happy to go with the publisher's suggestion in that instance.
It's nice when that happens, isn't it? When they make
it's
sense.
Often the other way, but yeah.
Panel, I'm going to ask this question of you. When you read this book, do you think of it more as let's call it a travel companion, but as you're traveling with this book, let's have this as a travel companion. Is it meant, do you think, to be kind of a solitary journey where you're going for your walks, you're doing the same thing that Andrew does, his water walks or whatever, and you're looking at everything around you, you're noticing the flora, the fauna, you're noticing the weather, you're talking about the peat, but is this more of a one in itself activity, or is this more of a kind of a social gathering book as well? This just came to mind as Andrew was talking. I'm trying to, is there a difference in them? Do you think of it more of one than the other? So I'll throw that out to our panel as I drink more scotch.
I've traveled for more years than I can remember. I've always been by myself. So this book basically speaks to my whole life, is traveling and noticing stuff while I'm on my own.
Okay. So it works for you as a one-on-one. How about you there, Kent? Mr. Whiskey Ass.
I actually, well, my wife and me travel quite a lot together. So we get into an area, and one of the things that struck me about the book was when Andrew's talking about walking the water sources and stuff like that. When we get into an area, we do very much the same, whether it be, you know, New York City or the outback of Australia. You get right into the area and you try and pick every little piece that you can get out of it to figure out what makes it tick.
Okay. So we've gone from the solitary to the couple. And Nick, do you see it as one, the other, all, neither?
Kind of neither for me, because this actually evokes memories. So I've been to Isla. I'm usually a solitary traveler, but when I was traveling to Isla, I took my parents with me. So it was one of those rare trips where I had company. So I created a whole bunch of memories with my parents. But even though they were there, I went off and did my own thing. So there were periods where they were traveling in with me, but they were seeing sites and I would go off wandering here. So it wasn't one or the other. It evokes a lot of emotion.
Okay.
But it also evoked a lot of the island for me. So as Andrew describes it, I can feel walking over the stones. You can feel the ground underneath you. You can smell the air as the breeze comes up, and you're like, you take that deep breath and you get that saltiness as it hits you in the face. And I don't know how else to describe it. It's very emotionally evoking.
Which is fantastic. I think as an author, you want that. I would.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Great answers, guys. And this one's another long question because there's two quotes that go with it. So everyone stick with me if you can. So Andrew and panel, I'll give you these two quotes because it relates to the next 5 questions, really. So the first one, I came down to open the distillery and found a wee plate of scones on the doorstep. No note, no anything. But it was just the villagers' way of saying, we know what you're doing and we're behind you. And the second quote, page 181, on the 25th of May, 2003, Bruichladdich achieved another first, becoming the only Islay distillery to bottle all its own stocks on the island. That's an important sentence. I'll say it again. All its own stocks on the island, and giving work to some of Islay's disabled residents as we do so. So I did love this. And panel, other than Campbelltown, which holds a place in my heart for much the same reason, does any other distilleries come to mind where they employ just about the whole town, or the whole town is there really to feed into this distillery, and there's a compatico relationship with them? So can you think of any offhand?
I want to say the Orkney Islands ones, Scapa and Highland Park, come to mind right off the top of my head because they are, again, other islands.
Yeah. Dufftown would be another one. Maybe not so much now, but in the beginning, it was pretty much created because of the distillery.
Well, and if you go back to that, Ardmore initially was created, and it had a town built up around it, and it was created as that blending agent for, was it teachers? And it was at the end of the line on the railway track. Was it teachers or bells? I can't remember, because it was shipped down to Glasgow.
Okay.
So yeah, there's been a whole bunch of distilleries created just for that sole purpose, and they had towns built up around it. It's no different than Walkerville here.
Yep. I love that though. I just like you're in it together, and well, especially the first part of that quote where he gets the scones and didn't know where it came from. It was emotive, is what it was for me as well. Andrew, can you think of others? And it doesn't have to. Let's open it up to wine. Let's open it up to anything else you can think of where they're so intertwined, they're inseparable.
Well, I mean, as far as whiskey goes, it would be even more true, I think, of Jura. You know, the Isle of Jura, because although the island is actually bigger than Islay, it's far less populous and far less developed, and you know, really, there isn't much economic activity on the island apart from distilling and a bit of shooting and that kind of thing. So, be even more true of Jura, I think. It really is the heartbeat of that particular island as far as regular year in, year out, season in, season out economic activity would be concerned. I haven't visited every distillery around Scotland. The other one that actually comes to my mind is, it's not quite the same case, but it's little Edradour up at Lochry, where I once did an assignment to learn how to make whiskey. It was. Okay. So I spent a couple of weeks up there going to the distillery kind of most days, and that was right down at one end of the town, and it was a complete beautiful little location, a jewel of a distillery that felt as if it had gathered very much its own community around it. And then once you come to the wine world and beer, I think perhaps a little less beer kind of, but there are also kind of lonely beer breweries as well. But wine for sure, there are many lonely places where wine gets made. One of my great enthusiasms is a wine called Madiran. Which is made in southwest France, a very dark, deep, sturdy wine. It would taste very good up in Canada, I'm sure, when you have spinal chill. It's the kind of red wine you when you have spinal chill. But that is a hugely remote location. It really is what the French call le fin fond du monde.
Okay.
The very last bit of the world. It doesn't even fall into any one particular département. It has 3 different départements all around it. Very hard to get to. It's a little bit easier now because there's a motorway nearby, but there didn't used to be. No trains, nothing like that. And very much, I mean, it's not the only activity there because they also have mixed farming activities as well. But as far as wine concerned, it's very much close to the spirit of the community. And there are many places like that in France as well. Again, it goes back to this sort of interrelationship, long, deep, culturally rich interrelationship between place and product that you tend to find with many alcoholic beverages.
And I was thinking the same thing. Well, in my mind, it was Châteauneuf-du-Pape. That whole region is. Is there another reason for it other than wine, or is it just because the wine is so good in that region that that's where it is?
It's absolutely true that, you know, the village of Châteauneuf-du-Pape is completely and utterly surrounded by vineyards, nothing else, and that is the sole agricultural activity around there. It's a slightly bigger place. I mean, it's over 3,000 hectares. It's one of France's largest appellations, so it's a bigger place than Isla, I think. I think I need to check that before anybody writes it down. I would need to check that, but
okay,
you know, it is a big economically important zone.
Yeah.
But yes, it's true. It's very much monocultural for sure.
And apparently they make good wines. My wife is here, and when you mentioned it, she's like,
I love my.
Okay, I guess it's good.
All right, and another quote. I said it led it to 5, but here's another quote. So the second part of that quote would be this. So this sprang out of the company desire to do everything itself, to bring as much employment as possible to the island, and to imbue its spirit with as much Isla character as possible. So Andrew presents the various views from the distilleries pertaining to aging their spirit on Isla. And this is one of the big conversational pieces I wanted to get to from the very beginning. So panel, do you believe that it makes a difference if they do everything on the island? If it's bottled on the island, aged on the island? Do you need those two things to make an Isla spirit?
I believe it does. Well, it's more romantic when I know it's made there, bottled there, and everything like that. I was going to go to another liquor store and buy a Caol Ila this morning, and I kept thinking, oh, it's not packaged there. It's shipped off the island. Maybe I'll just pass on it. So yeah, it just, when I started reading it, I really wanted it, and now I don't want it so much.
Okay.
That's just me.
No, it's good. Thank you very much.
Reading back and forth on so many things, we very much romanticize the fact of the sea spray, you know, dumping all over the casks and getting that sea salt into the casks, and then finding out that it's actually shipped to the main island. And then I'm like, do I really notice the difference?
Well,
I really do like my Caol Ilas. Yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
I'd like to see some that's actually aged on the island and some that's not aged on the island, and just see if there is a difference.
As long as it's the same new make. So we start with the same new make. We put it in the same barrels, essentially, something very similar, and leave one on the island, leave one on the mainland, bring it somewhere else that they could, and just check that out. It would be nice. Go ahead, Nick.
I'm going to jump ahead then to one of the other distillers we're going to talk about, Bunnahabhain. They take a lot of their barrels off island, and people love them, and they know they take them off island, and they're very open about that. And it's an Isla whiskey, and it's through and through, and they have very much a cult following where you have to beat at the doors to get the bottles, and you're fighting for these bottles. So I think it's romanticism, it's amazing marketing, and it's selling the story. Come on, it all goes back to where we started a year ago and what Davin told us. It's selling the story. You sell a good story, it makes for a great dram because you have something to attach drinking that spirit to.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. And I'll ask you the same question, but maybe we can I had this question as well. You have a quote in relation to Caol Ila, and how they market it, and your opposition not to the spirit itself, but the marketing, I think. If we could kind of aboard that. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I think that works well here.
Yeah. This is a complicated question, actually. It resists a simple answer, I'm afraid. If you speak to the technical people, they say they have done all the tests, and they don't find a lot of difference. It's the aging in Scotland that really counts, they'll say. And let's say for kind of 90% of the profile of the spirit, I'm sure that's true. However, Isla really is a special place. You know, Isla definitely has different weather conditions, different air conditions, different humidity, different levels of saturation of the marine element in the air element to those that you're going to find in central Scotland. No question of that. You're going to age the whiskey for the best part of 10 years in most cases, and often much, much longer than that. You're not going to top it up. So the barrel isn't going to be kept full the whole time. The barrel is going to be on ullage. It's going to have a gap in there, an air gap. And to me, I still don't completely believe the technical people on this particular issue. I do think this is an important issue. And I cannot believe that if you age a spirit for 15 or 18 years in central Scotland and on Islay, let's say in one of the Lefroy warehouses, which is right next to the sea, where it completely gets a hammering from the west, I cannot believe that that wouldn't be different. I cannot believe it won't make a difference. Now, after that, you know, what is it that you actually age in Islay? I do agree with the big companies and people on Islay when they say, look, we don't want the whole island covered in warehousing. And if every single drop of Islay spirit distilled on the island was warehoused throughout its entire life prior to blending and bottling on the island really would look very different. It would be a much, much more industrial setting. I don't think we want that. So I'm perfectly happy for Colila that it's going to be used for blending purposes in Johnnie Walker whiskies, for example, to go and be aged in central Scotland. Absolutely no problem about that, because you're not buying it as an Islay spirit at that point. But for any distillery bottling of the distillery spirit, where you're selling so much of the story, as Nick's alluded to, is going to be based on Islay itself, the notion of the island, the quiddity of the island, the thingness of the island, the presence, the physical presence of the island, the physical presence of the weather, the seasons, everything about it, the peat, the heather, the whole works, all the stuff that the advertising and marketing is full of. If you're going to actually sell that spirit, and then you discover it's actually only spent, it's an 18-year-old and it's only spent 2 weeks on the island, I think that is a slight deception being practiced on the drinker, and I don't think that should happen. I think the amount of Islay spirit that's actually sold as single malt from the island, I would be very surprised if it was anything over 5%. I'm sure it's less than that, even given the revolution in malt whiskey sales that we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, because most of the island's production is certainly still going into the blending system. So it seems to me it ought to be possible to create enough warehousing on the island so that every single Islay whiskey that claims Islay parentage and patrimony was actually bottled on the island. And I would like, we can perhaps move on and talk about things like PGIs, geographical indications, and the legislation surrounding those. Yep. It's always, of course, been resisted that the actual bottling should ever be a part of a geographical indication. But it's very much true in France. I mean, well, actually, you can. Yes, no, they always get round it. They always get round it one way or the other. So it is a difficult question. But I think it's sort of a question of fundamental honesty vis-a-vis your drinker, to actually try it if you possibly can. And I know it's harder for some distilleries and others to age every single drop that you're going to put into a bottle of your single malt on the island.
I just look at this picture goes through my head of me going to the gift shop at Kalila, asking the question. And he goes, "Oh no, we just make it, then we ship it away. We don't see it until it comes back." I'm thinking, "Well, do I really want to buy this?" Like that just won't leave my head.
So they would have something else. They wouldn't tell us. They wouldn't diminish it that way. But then again, every distillery, they have their reasons for doing it on the island or not on island, and they'll convince you that it makes a difference or doesn't make a difference. But it comes from the pure spring waters of Islay as it comes down. So I think there's, no matter how they package it, you're going to, at the time, quite possibly believe them. And that,
it does, Colila does come into. It is born on the island of Islay. There's no question of that, and in a very, very special place on the island of Islay as well.
But isn't
you know, that's also a source of pleasure, and the sense of place does, of course, saturate the spirit because of that. It's just, for me, they haven't quite completed the job if they're carting it all off to central Scotland for aging.
And just some informational background. This was part of a quote we skipped over. So this is Andrew's response. And my own view is that this is indeed irrelevant for the bulk production for Caol Ila, since all of this spirit will eventually be lost in the blends, which he stated before. But for the 2% of those 3.5 million liters, which is massive, which does go to market, Caol Ila branded single malt, 70,000 liters, the place and circumstances of the aging matter enormously. So if you're going to blend, it doesn't really matter. If you are going to say that it's an Islay blend, or it's an Islay whiskey, or it's pure Islay, whichever way they say it, then I'm going to agree with Andrew. I think that it should be, if you're going to say that. But if Bunnahabhain says, you know what, we don't care, it's I don't even know how Bunnahabhain really promotes it, because I'm not going to read the back of this, but I've always loved Bunnahabhain, and it might just be because I like Bunnahabhain more than Caol Ila. Could we? Maybe that's it, and we don't have to care. All right, let's move on to another one, and still in the same realm. So, and of course, I have another quote. All right, indeed. Oh, I have to find it first. There we go. Boom. Okay, indeed, Highland and Edrington experiments were carried out to see if Islay aging could genuinely alter the character of any whiskey stored on the island. In the late 1980s, casks of spirits from other distilleries other than Bunnahabhain, such as Glenrothes, owned by Edrington Group, were sent over for storage on Islay. The results, though, were never made public, which I found really interesting. And the warehousemen say that most of the experimental casks have now been removed. So panel, I want you to put on your conspiracy theory hats. And why was this never made public? And what were they hiding? So Edrington owns Macallan, Highland, Park, and Glenrothes. Are they hiding something?
I asked the question.
And we'll ask Andrew at the end of this. So let's go ahead.
As soon as I read that part, I'm thinking, well, why would you do this in the first place if you're not looking for a result? And you do all this, take this time and effort, and then nothing comes of it?
I think they're looking for a result, and they didn't get the one they want.
What were they looking for a result, though? Good.
That it doesn't matter. And then it does. I don't know. Ken, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of agreeing there. I think they maybe they found out that it maybe made their product way superior and didn't want to have to be paying the island to store it. You know, maybe they found out that it just absolutely, they had bad casks or the sea salt. It's hard to say. I mean, there's so many directions you could go with that. And, you know, without knowing what became of those casks, I don't know we can really, you know, ever come down to the end.
Perfect. That's okay. I'm going to guess my way anyways. I'll convince myself I'm right somehow. Nick, go ahead.
I'm thinking that they likely ran into some trouble because the 1980s, they likely didn't have the knowledge of wood management that we're seeing in place that's happening nowadays. So there's a good chance that they had some really bad casks and they had some really good casks. They got a range of different results. But it also makes you wonder if they were using it to possibly exploit a system. Knowing who Edrington Group is and the brands that they represent, I have some personal bias against some of those brands. I don't like them. I don't like their marketing. I don't like their branding.
Okay.
So some of those things. I've got a bit of that conspiracy theory. I'm like, I'm wondering what they were trying to achieve, what they wanted to do.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm here with you guys, but I did say I might have pushed the thought with the conspiracy theory though, but I'm all for it. Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, well, before I answer, which I will, I'd just like to hear a bit more from Nick about that's really got me intrigued. You don't like the way they brand stuff. You don't like the marketing. What is it that's upsetting you? Just briefly tell us.
Some of the branding is very biased, very gender biased, which I find hard to swallow some days, as well as you watch the branding in the whole coloration issue that took place. And I think they've been part of the problem with the whole E150A issue that has taken the whole whiskey enthusiast world apart. Okay. So it came up, it's been an issue, it now is an issue, but is it really an issue?
Are you referring to Macallan and Highland Park specifically?
Yes.
Or all three of them, because those two in my mind come out with exactly
those two are the big one. Glenrothes sort of has dodged the bullet. They've sort of they keep slipping under the wire each time. And Glenrothes, I love. They have an amazing product. And yeah, like Macallan, I've always had trouble with. They keep changing the product. They keep changing the delivery of the product. They keep changing how they deliver it, and the price keeps changing.
Okay.
It's not a consistent product for the end consumer.
Okay.
So it makes you question. And I guess when you bring up this whole question of like, why were they doing it? It again leads to what were they trying to achieve? What were they trying to do? And what was the consumer going to end up having to pay?
Okay. And your problem with them is sexism. Mine's more of a class relationship. If you go on to their homepage and how they promote whiskey, it's really a class structure. It's made for the haves and not the have-nots. And so that's my pushing point. So, but maybe we'll talk about this a bit more in the after dram too. We could do this, Andrew.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's very interesting to me to hear that stuff. Yeah, so thank you, Nick, for that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm much more subscribed to the cock-up rather than the conspiracy general theory of things. So it seems to me that if they started this experiment and it didn't go anywhere, it was probably because somebody accidentally sent the wrong casks away and then they couldn't check, and in the end the whole thing fell apart because it wasn't very efficiently done. I suspect that's more likely than any kind of a determined attempt to hide the truth. But what I will say is I'm sure that Diageo will have some very good research on this. They have 2 distilleries on the island. It's an absolutely key question for them. They do storage of Lagavulin on Islay, so they will constantly be seeing Lagavulin samples stored on the island against Lagavulin samples stored in central Scotland. And I'd be, knowing the kind of technical breadth of the company, I'd be very surprised if they didn't have some really great first-hand research on this subject. And so if I was still in, full-time researching in the whiskey field, which I haven't been more or less since I wrote the book, sadly, that's something I would love to go and ask the technical team at Diageo. Come on, you've got to have done these tastings repeatedly. Can we just see the results? Can you share those results? Maybe they're right. Maybe they're absolutely the best noses in the business look at these things, all completely muddled up in genuine blind testing conditions, and they can't tell the difference. So maybe there is no difference. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying it seems counterintuitive to me. And until I'm presented with some compelling evidence, I have a nagging doubt.
Good. I think we should all have a nagging doubt with things like this. I do. And if someone's got to push the barrier a little bit and push them around a little bit, they make a lot of money, but they're very powerful as an organization. It's hard to pin very powerful organizations down. But if they do want to seem transparent, I think they should be forthcoming. I agree. New quote. And this one brought a lump to my throat. I loved it. So page 177, it was crystal clear. None of us spoke. To speak would have been to cry. We all found a hole in the floor to look at, so they didn't have to look at each other and cry. The distillery had come back to life again. We had found its pulse. So I want to know, was anyone else moved by this? It all looked so bleak for them at that moment. They didn't know if they had made a horrible mistake in reopening the distillery. And then, with a little bit of patience, boom, it worked. So, and I like this a lot because it's a big moment. And I tend to think in big moments as a teacher, but when I do things with friends, to recognize that this is a moment that you want to remember in history. And that right there, that quote is one that I think would, obviously it stuck with them, but it's sticking with me in this book. So I'm wondering if anyone else had any big moments they want to talk about when reading this book, or if they just had the lump in the throat, or they just think I'm a little bit too sentimental. I'll leave that up there.
Yeah.
I think the lump in the throat is good because is right on, because I think we've all had the experience where we've done something, time, effort, and all of a sudden you think, God, I hope this works.
Yeah.
And then it does work, and then, oh, geez.
Yeah.
I'd hate to be on the other end of that. That, geez, that was a disaster.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's a memorable moment too. So
I think we've all had a few of those in our lifetime.
all right. Thank you very much. It's good. I like the lump in the throat moments, but I'm going to go directly back just to the whiskeys in front of us. And we're all Peat fans. We drink Peat. We enjoy it. I don't know if we like Peat more than non-Peat as a panel, but we tend to like Peat when we talk to each other. But we don't know everything there is about Peat. We don't. We've looked it up. We've read our books. We've talked to the authors. But I wanted you to look back into the chapter about Peat and see if it was something that you learned or relearned that maybe you forgot. And I'm going to start. I just wanted to say that I forgot that Peat was dried by the wind as opposed to the sun. And it just makes sense because there's not enough sun really to dry it. It's the wind, and it's a lot of wind passing through, and how they lay the stump so that the wind actually passes through it to dry the peat. So that I forgot about completely. And if I read it, it was a very, very long time ago. So I'll throw this up to the rest of you, including Andrew, if there's something that you learned while doing the research that you didn't think was part of it.
You know what I'd say honestly is anyone who goes to Isla honestly should be reading this book as they're going across on the ferry, and as they're driving along, or somebody is driving them, because every look out the window, every breath, and as you're reading this, you'll go, oh my God, it will click. And it will go, oh, this makes sense. Because as I'm reading this book, I'm going, oh yeah, now I'm remembering. Now those visual pictures for me of that trip, I'm like, oh, okay, it's coming back, and it's coming back with a greater clarity of why that was happening, why that was being done, why the peat was being stacked, why they went so many layers down, and why you would see fields with peat with that top layer carved off.
Yep.
And then these deep ditches with water sitting fallow in it.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. How about our other two panel members? Something that you didn't know?
I was surprised by how much peat there is in the world, and especially when you said Canada was #1.
Yeah.
And we had this discussion around the fire last night. It's different peat. Like, I don't think we could get a decent whiskey out of the stuff we have here.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it would work quite the same.
Yeah.
There is one bottle, and we've had it before. Well, I've made you guys have it before, which is Peat from Saskatchewan. So
that was well, I'll keep I'll hold my tongue.
Dave really didn't like it. But there's another Peat as well out of Washington is coming in the States, and their Peat's looking pretty good. Like, I've tasted it, and I kind of like it. So I think that maybe one day the right type of peat, there's a lot in Canada, obviously. Maybe they just got the wrong spot in Saskatchewan for you there, Dave.
It was great because it was a blind tasting, and that one stood out like a sore thumb. That one, I could eliminate that instantly.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's sore thumb with a sliver in it that's pustering for a week.
He hated that. Okay.
But that peat machine you talked about that laid out like a sausage-like tube of peat behind it, I thought that was really. I was just waiting to see one of those things sink to the bottom, or as far down as it could go. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting.
My question is more about with the amount of peat they're harvesting, are they going to run out? And what is it doing to their ecological system? Because it takes so long to develop that peat. And I mean, you're talking, 1 inch for hundreds of years. and you come along and you take a 4-inch slab out of it, you're talking centuries worth. It's just not replaceable at that kind of volume. So we can take that down the whole green, path and wonder if there should be a halt to it or some kind of slowing down of the usage of peat. Not that I ever want to see that happen in my lifetime, because we want to enjoy it, but future generations, it may just ruin the island for that, because I know that there are areas where they've run out and they're moving in more up into the northern sections where they have large amounts of peat, but eventually it will run out.
Yep. I do address, this question to some extent in the chapter itself. Another thing to say is, of course, that there's a lot of peat on the island, but it's not all accessible. Not just having the peat on the island that counts, it's also having the peat that's actually accessible and that you can get at that counts as well. I learned a lot when I wrote that chapter. The two things I really enjoyed about the chapter was, one was to sort of realize that peat is actually sort of as much liquid as it is solid.
Yes.
And the big tractor that Dave has just alluded to, this is a colossal thing with 3 wheels on each side stuck to each other. And therefore it's able to drag forward and extrude peat in a continuous sausage. But as it goes, it's almost like slow motion surfing. You can see a kind of wave of peat move ahead of it as it's coming. So that sort of underscores just how liquid the whole section is. That part. That peatlands are wetlands. Not for nothing are they called wetlands. They are completely wet and completely sodden, and that's how peat comes into existence. So that to me was very interesting. Yes, obviously you're right. There are many, many sorts of peat around the world, and I don't suppose the peat that you find in Iraq is terribly suitable for making peaty whiskey, nor is it likely to be turned into peaty whiskey.
No.
There is peat all over the place. The other part that I really enjoyed about that chapter was spending some time with Norrie Kimball, or Norman Campbell, as his real birth name was, who actually died not too long after the book was written. So I was very glad I was able to do that. If ever there was an emblematic Ilach is somebody from Islay, it was him, and I really treasured that meeting and the bits of our conversation that I was able to put into the book. So to me, that was very precious too, because here was somebody who was as intimately involved in the production process as any distiller or as any brand ambassador, and yet completely at the other end of it, struggling against the elements with physical work, hard physical work, year in, year out, at the very bottom of the pyramid of flavor construction, as it were. So that was also pretty precious to me. I would say, I would stress that one of the things I'm happiest about in the book is the extensive quotations from the people involved, the people on the island, the Ilachs themselves. You've already given us 2 wonderful quotes, Dolph.
Only 2?
Earlier on, the quote about scones,
50.
and then just now the quote about finding the hole in the floor to look at. Those are both quotes from Jim McEwan.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll all know about Jim McEwan. Probably most of the people watching this will also know exactly who Jim McEwan is, and maybe have even met him or heard him. But he is an Ilach and a wonderful storyteller. You get a flavor of his storytelling abilities from those quotes, I think. And that's another example of a very precious person whose words I feel honored to have been able to, I won't say immortalize, but at least preserve for some time in the covers of the book. And there are many others too. And when I go back and look at the book again, those are some of the things that mean the most to me.
Nice. Okay. I like that. And I'm going to add as well the amount of time that the water actually stays in the bog in the peat. That was something I learned as well. So much longer than I thought. I knew it was a bit stagnant, but not the amount of time that you were quoting. So, and talking about quotes, I'm going to give you another quote. So, where is it? So this quote, when I began to work on the book in 2002. I've got this. Maybe I don't have it. Maybe I'm just going to read it to you. I'll read it. So this surprised me. So I don't get surprised by quotes all that often. They're moving, but you don't get surprised. This surprised me. When I began work on this book in 2002, it was the saddest of the seven. You'd almost hear Soviet-era martial music drifting on the wind as you took your souvenir photograph down at the pier. So, Andrew, did your opinion of the aesthetic improve as you became more intimately linked to that distillery? And that's
Okay.
because it was dire. It looked horrible. And then it seemed to change your perception as you went on in the descriptions. So was your initial impression the result of the building itself, or maybe because your mood at the time? Because that happens to me. I see something that seems dreary, but it's my mood, and then changes the more you know it. So was it still dreary at the end?
Well, I knew a few of the people who worked at the distillery by the end, but I have to say that when I wrote this book, the research was between 2002, 2003, a little bit into 2004, a little bit into 2001.
Okay.
This was the distillery for sure in the worst shape at that point. And if I was to have the chance to go back to the island and as it were, bring it all up to date, probably the first distillery I'd head off to see would be Bunnahabhain, because obviously it had fantastic potential. It had been neglected. It had been passed on from one owner to another owner. Nobody really seemed to want it much at that stage. Certainly nobody treasured it much. It was very uncosseted. It was very functional, workaday, industrial. But also it had this air of mournful neglect about it, because quite often it had been silent in the the recent years of the time I went there, and it had no visitor facilities or anything like that, and it had its own housing, but a lot of the housing was dilapidated and broken down. So it really was the distillery that was kind of limping on behind the others, struggling to keep up at that stage. And I just wanted to provide a sort of an honest account of that. Later when I had the chance to talk to John and to Victor and the people who worked there, that brought it a bit to life more, because you could see that it had had this very busy past and things had happened there. And, there were interesting stories to be told, as there were interesting stories to be told everywhere. But in terms of investment by the owners, it was certainly in the worst state of all at that stage. I think we're 2 owners on now. I believe that Distella's invested an awful lot in it. That's certainly the what Dave said in the foreword, and Dave will have been there many times since 2004. So that's fantastic. And as I say, if I was going back to the island tomorrow, that would be the first distillery I'd head up to see how it had changed.
And you would stay at the at these right here, because
if I had the chance.
So
yeah, because
I'd love to.
The whole experience of Islay is an experience of wildness, and if you really want wildness, well, you want as much wildness as you can possibly get hold of, and those holiday cottages will give it to you. So yeah.
And there's a lot of cottages, because I tried to look for your specific 4, but when you do a search for the cottages anywhere near the distillery, it's blown up. There's so many places you can stay by Bunnahabhain in these beautiful, pristine cottages that have a view of possibly the distillery, but definitely of the ocean and the rocks and the sea that you do it. So, and I suggested beforehand that if Kent won the lottery, that he's bringing us there everywhere. Go ahead there, Kent.
Hey, so you were saying that you were trying to find the pricing per night. They start at $121 a night, US.
Not terribly expensive either. And I found cheaper ones as well, but I can't picture it. Go ahead, Nick.
That is off season. Seasonal prices are £260 a night.
Yeah.
Now, when you say seasonal, is it Faisala or is it just in the summer?
April to September.
Okay. Yeah. Good. That's all right. Kent can afford it if he wins the lottery. It's fun.
Yeah.
We're all
When I buy a lottery ticket and I win, sure.
thanks, man. Thanks, and we've got it on tape. All right, and yeah, that's a good one. But we're gonna end off because we've got 5 minutes, and I'm just gonna give you a last little question, Andrew. I got the impression that you weren't a fan of Kalila. Is it because it seemed too businesslike, or did I misread it? Because it just seemed like you weren't as taken with it as Bunnahabhain, as Bruichladdich. The magic didn't come out into your words, or maybe it might be me reading it that way. So I'll just ask.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that, Dolph.
Okay.
Whenever I think of Isla,
Mhm.
you know, when I'm lying awake in the small hours, as I often am, because I'm a pretty lousy sleeper. And one of the nice things to think about to try and get you back to sleep is Isla, of course.
Okay.
Very often what I'm thinking about is the Colila still room.
Oh.
Because if ever a still room had a magnificent view, that
would be it. Okay.
it's the Colila still room. The Colila stills are pretty magnificent themselves anyway. But then you look out onto the Sound of Isla, you know, with the water racing past, and you look over to Jura, and very often the weather is hammering down on the windows, you know, rain, sleet, whatever. And you're in the warm near these huge beasts, which are slowly producing the wonderful spirit trickling from them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is a pretty magic place. And I'm, you know, many of you watching this will be contemplating perhaps going to Isla for the first time. And if you leave it a little bit longer, you'll be amongst the first visitors to go to the completely revamped Colila with full visitor facilities. And I'm sure you'll be able to appreciate that for yourselves when you go there, because I'm sure they'll do a good job in making it supremely visitable. And it is a wonderful, wonderful site, because it's no distillery on Isla is tucked away to quite the same extent as Colila. It's down in this little dip. There was originally a waterfall there. You know, you don't really see it from the approaches. You have to go down this steep road to get there. It really is a little niche right next to the sound of right next to the rushing waters going by. So it's a magnificent site to go to as well. So you know, maybe you got that impression because of the whole business about aging off the island, and that's fair enough. But in terms of actual warmth of feeling towards the place itself and towards the people, Billy Stitchell was in charge. Fantastic guy. Elach, great guy. I really enjoyed meeting him. He was always wonderfully helpful, very modest, very humane person. Retired now. So I felt very warmly about the distillery and the people that work there. Yeah, no qualms at all. Colila's fantastic.
Good to hear that. Our time's up, but we have enough time for everyone to have a last comment, and we'll go alphabetically. So Dave, Kent, and Nick, and we'll finish off with you, Andrew. Dave, any last comments? Nope. Dave,
you're muted.
Technology again screws me up.
You're good.
What I was, I'll cut this short. I read a lot of whiskey books, and they've all been about whiskey. This one, I think, is a complete book about the island, the whiskey, the people. It's really interesting. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, bud. Kent?
Actually, Andrew's description about the Kalila distillery just zapped me back to about a year ago when we were doing our Canadian distilleries. Let's see if you guys remember which one we were at. That literally we're looking at the stills and they panned their camera to the window overlooking the ocean.
It's in Newfoundland.
Newfoundland.
I won't forget that one.
Yeah. It was just, reminiscent of the Canadian distillery as well. There's a lot of connections between the two. And I find it really funny reading this book. It keeps coming back to Canada as well. So
nice. Thank you, sir. Nick?
If and when Kent wins the lottery and takes us all to Isla, I'd like Andrew to be our tour guide, because this
Price
book
is no object. We're good.
This book is an amazing travel guide, a historical guide, but it brings you into the world of Isla, and it sucks you in, and you don't want to leave.
Nice. I can agree completely with all three comments, which doesn't happen very often. Andrew,
I better start buying some lotto tickets.
Do a group lotto buy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, very briefly, we've done 2 programs already. We've got another program coming up next week. We also had the after dram after this. So we're sort of, yes, it's the end of this segment, but, we're in the middle of the thing anyway. Just to say that the 2 distilleries we're looking at this week, Bunnahabhain and Bruichladdich. And I think of those 2 as being kind of almost a pair, because they both have a very kind of pure sculpted style to their spirit. And they're also somehow, when you think of the kind of south and the north of things, the north is always the purest, the most finely honed, the most sculpted. Literally, Bunnahabhain is the furthest north as well, and Bruichladdich isn't far south too. So what we're doing in this particular program is looking at that northern sector. So this is our northern program as far as Isla's concerned, and I think those 2 distilleries fit that bill very, very nicely.
Perfect. Well said, everybody. Well said, everybody. Whiskey brothers and sisters, that's the Whiskey Book Club for this week. We're moving our conversation from this formalized format to more relaxed, equally engaging, probably more colorful conversation called the After Jam. So our author is going to be with us right here. Here's the book. Need the book of Whiskey Island, a portrait of Isla and its whiskeys. And you should buy the book if you haven't done it already. He's, of course, going to be with us. And really, what else should you be doing this afternoon and evening if you're in Europe? Then spending a little bit more time with us. I think it's a fantastic idea. So we're going to be back in roughly 5 to 10 minutes for the after dram. And if you don't want to miss a minute of our 4th and final week, April 24th, with Andrew, please click the like and subscribe button. And we shall see you all very soon. So cheers to one and all. And thank you very much to all our viewers.